The first thing Wayan told her was simple. You can watch it once. You should not go back. Clara is a documentary filmmaker. She has filmed ceremonies in 11 countries. She knows the difference between a local superstition offered to a nervous visitor and a genuine instruction. She watched the footage again that night, and then again the following morning. On the fourth viewing, she found what she had not been looking for. A figure standing completely still at the edge of the frame, facing her camera, present in every replay she had already watched. She called Wayan. He said only, "You have been watching it again." This story comes from Clara, a filmmaker based in Amsterdam. She spent 3 weeks in Ubud following a single evening's footage. Everything, the warning, the figure that was not there, until the fourth viewing, the senior temple priest who said it noticed you watching, as though this were a simple fact of physics, and what she was asked to do to close the loop is exactly as she described it to me. The ritual began before Clara was ready. She had positioned herself carefully, left of center, about 12 meters back, close enough for the camera to hold detail, but far enough to catch the full arc of the chanting circle. 60 men, maybe more, seated in concentric rings on the stone courtyard, their torsos bare, their voices already building when she arrived. The temple walls rose behind them, their carved surfaces lit orange from below by torches planted at the courtyard's edges. The smell was wood smoke and incense, and the particular warmth of many bodies in a close space on a tropical night. Clara had filmed ceremonies before, in Morocco, in Kerala, in rural Japan. She knew how to be present without being intrusive, how to hold the camera still when stillness was what the moment required. She pressed record and let the scene come to her. The Kecak built in layers, the chanting, kak chak chak chak, kak kak chak, started at a single pitch and multiplied, different sections picking up different rhythms until the sound stopped being human voices and became something structural, something that seemed to come from the ground as much as from the men. The fire at the courtyard center was fed periodically by an attendant who moved between the rings with the calm efficiency of someone maintaining a machine. Then the dancer entered. He wore a headdress of flowers and gold leaf, his face painted into an expression that was not quite a face at all. The angles too precise, the stillness between movements too complete. He moved through the inner ring and then through the fire's edge, and Clara tracked him with the camera and did not breathe, and the chanting rose, and for a long moment the entire courtyard was operating at a frequency she could feel in the bones of her jaw. When it ended, gradually, the chanting descending back through its layers until the last voice stopped, she stood in the sudden quiet and realized her hands were shaking very slightly against the camera body. Wayan found her at the edge of the courtyard, reviewing the footage on the camera's small screen. He was the local guide she had hired for the week. 30s, methodical, fluent in the particular English of someone who had spent years translating, not just language but context. He looked at the footage over her shoulder for a moment without speaking. "It's extraordinary," she said. "The light, the sound. I think I got it." He nodded slowly, then he said, "You can watch it once. You should not go back." Clara looked at him. Why? He was quiet for long enough that she thought he was going to deflect, to give her the version for tourists, the one that kept things manageable, but he didn't. "The first time," he said carefully, "the ritual shows you what it chooses to show you. You are new. You don't know the grammar yet. It allows that. He looked at the courtyard, now emptying, the torches being extinguished one by one. The second time, you are no longer a stranger. Clara waited for more. He didn't offer any. She thanked him and walked back to the villa through the warm dark, the camera strap over her shoulder, the footage already feeling like something she had been given rather than taken. She was on a return flight in 4 days. She had what she needed. Back at the villa, she opened her laptop and began the admin work of a shoot's first night, logging files, checking audio sync, making preliminary notes. She found the Garuda Indonesia website in a separate tab and looked at flights. There was one leaving the day after tomorrow. If she moved her connection, she could be home by Saturday. She held the cursor over the booking button for a long moment. Then she opened a new tab instead and searched for the ritual's performance schedule. It ran again on Thursday. She did not book the earlier flight. She told herself she was being professional. That one additional session, now that she understood the space, would give her coverage she couldn't get from a single night. She noted this justification in the back of her mind and did not examine it further. She closed the laptop and went to bed and lay in the dark, listening to the geckos on the wall and the ceiling fan, and somewhere outside, the persistent low sound of the jungle, doing what jungles do at night, which was to continue quietly its own separate business. The first night she watched the footage as a filmmaker, she went through it methodically, checking exposure, assessing the audio levels, flagging the strongest sequences for rough assembly. The chanting circle had translated well to the sensor. The fire at the courtyard center gave everything a warm, unstable light that a cinematographer would have struggled to replicate artificially. She made notes. She drank tea. She was professional and satisfied, and went to bed at midnight. The second night, she watched it differently. She wasn't editing this time. She was looking, the way you look at something you want to understand, rather than something you want to use. She let the footage run at full speed, not stopping to flag or assess, and tried to feel it the way an audience would. The chanting was better than she remembered. The dancer's movement through the fire was even stranger on screen than it had been in person. Something about the way the camera flattened depth made the moment he passed through the flame look less like a physical act and more like a transition between two versions of the same image. The third night, she found the figure. She had paused on a wide frame, one of the establishing shots she had taken early in the ritual, the full chanting circle visible, the temple wall rising behind them, the torches making the outer darkness absolute. She was checking the edges of the frame for a composition decision. Her eye moved along the left side, past the outer ring of chanters, past the zone where the torchlight thinned, to the place where the stone courtyard gave way to the shadow of the colonnade. There was someone standing there. Not a performer, no headdress, no costume, nothing that marked them as part of the ceremony. Not a tourist, no camera, no phone, none of the reflexive documentation that visitors carried into every lit space. Just a figure, standing with the stillness of someone who had been there for a very long time, and facing the camera directly, not looking at the ritual, looking at the lens. Clara leaned forward. She stepped through the footage frame by frame. The figure was present in 6 shots, spanning 40 minutes of recording, always in the same position, always still, always facing the camera with the patient, level attention of someone waiting to be acknowledged. She checked her memory of the night. She had been aware of her surroundings. She was always aware of her surroundings on a shoot. She had not seen anyone standing in that colonnade. She closed the laptop. She sat in the dark villa for a while, listening to the ceiling fan and the geckos. And then she opened it again and looked at the figure in the frame one more time. She was at the temple by 9 the following morning. The daylight version of the complex was quieter than she expected. No tourists yet at this hour, just the thick green smell of the surrounding garden, a pair of roosters somewhere beyond the outer wall, and 2 priests in white and yellow moving between the shrines with small offering baskets. The stone was grey and moss-covered in the shaded corners. Everything had the slightly reduced quality of sacred spaces in non-performance hours, like a theater seen from the stage rather than the seats. She walked toward the inner courtyard where the ritual had taken place. A man stepped in front of her before she reached the gate. Senior in bearing, older than the 2 priests, his sash more elaborate, his manner carrying the specific stillness of someone accustomed to being the last word on a matter. He looked at her without surprise, which was itself surprising. He studied her face for a moment. Then he said, "You have been watching it again." Not a question. The same flat, declarative tone that Wayan had used 2 nights ago. The tone of someone confirming what they already know. Clara stopped. She felt the particular discomfort of being known before you have introduced yourself. "I wanted to ask about the footage," she said. "There's something in it I can't explain." He looked at her for another moment. Then he stepped back from the gate and said, "Come, but not with the camera." She left it in her bag and followed him in. Ida Bagus Sutta spoke to her on 2 afternoons. The first was in a small open pavilion at the edge of the temple complex, away from the main shrines, where a low table held an offering basket and a glass of water that nobody drank. He sat across from Clara with the same unhurried stillness he had shown at the gate, not performing patience, simply having it, the way people do who have spent decades not rushing important things. He had agreed to speak after examining her footage on the screen she held out to him. He had looked at the figure in the colonnade for perhaps 10 seconds. Then he had handed the camera back without comment and told her to return the following afternoon. She had, and then again the afternoon after that. He began, not with the ritual, but with sound. The chanting, he explained, was structural. She had the word wrong in her head. She had been thinking of it as musical, as performance, as the thing the audience experienced. That was the outer layer, and it was real, but it was not the function. The function was frequency. 60 voices, holding specific tones in specific ratios, produced something that acted on the space the way a key acted on a lock. It changed the properties of what it entered. He described this plainly, without drama, the way an engineer might explain load distribution. "The Kecak opens a passage," he said, "between what is ordinarily visible and what stands at its edge. The passage is temporary. When the chanting ends, it closes." Clara asked what stood at the edge. He considered the question carefully, which told her it was not a simple one. Not spirits in the way you might mean, not the dead. What stands at the edge is old, present in the same way the ground is present. You do not usually perceive it because your senses are not configured for it. The ritual briefly reconfigures the space. She asked about the protection. Wayan had implied it. She had been thinking about it for days. Ida Bagus Sutta nodded as if this was the question he had been waiting for. A person who attends once comes without knowledge. They cannot study what they do not yet understand, so they perceive only the surface, the fire, the chanting, the dancer. What the ritual opens becomes aware of them in the way you become aware of a bird flying past a window. Present, then gone. He paused. A person who returns, particularly one who has been reviewing the recording, studying the sequence, learning the grammar of the ceremony, is different. They begin to understand the structure, and what the ritual opens responds to being understood. He looked at her directly. It becomes curious. Clara sat with that for a moment. The figure in my footage is not a ghost. It is not a person who died. He was calm and entirely certain. It is the attention of what the ritual summons, directed back at the person who has been paying attention to the ritual. You watched it. It noticed you watching. It looked back. The afternoon light was moving across the pavilion floor between them, slow and golden. Somewhere in the temple garden, a bird called 3 times and stopped. Clara thought about the footage. The figure standing at the edge of the torchlight, still, facing the lens across 40 minutes of recording. Not moving, not threatening, just present, with the level attentiveness of something that had become aware of a new variable. "Can it follow me?" she asked. She had been not asking this for 2 days. Ida Bagus Sutta tilted his head slightly. "It is not interested in following you. It is interested in the watching itself. You created a loop. You watched the ritual. The ritual watched you. And each time you played the recording, you deepened the connection." He folded his hands on the table. "The question is not whether it will follow. The question is whether you are willing to close the loop." He told her what closing it required. She did not speak for a long time after. She left the camera at the villa, not in her bag, not turned off, and tucked into a jacket pocket as a fallback. She left it on the desk under the window, its lens cap on, the battery removed and placed beside it on a folded cloth. She stood looking at it for a moment before she left. The way you look at something you have carried so long that setting it down feels like a decision about more than just the object. Wayan drove her to the temple without asking questions. She had told him what Ida Bagus Sutta had instructed, and he had nodded once in the way he had of acknowledging things that confirmed what he already knew. He parked outside the complex walls and kept the engine running, and she got out and stood in the warm evening air and listened to the chanting already beginning somewhere inside. The outer gate was open. Ida Bagus Sutta was waiting near it. He looked at her hands, checking she understood that they were empty, and then he led her around the edge of the outer courtyard to a position on the south side of the chanting circle, where a gap had been left in the outermost ring. He stopped beside the gap and turned to her. "You do not need to understand the words," he said. "You only need to produce the sound. Listen for the section nearest you and follow the rhythm." A pause. "Do not watch the dancer. Do not look at the colonnade. Do not look for anything." He left her there and took his place among the ritual attendants. Clara sat down on the stone. Around her, the other men in the outer ring were already in motion. The Kecak building from the inner rings outward, the layers thickening, the torches feeding the warm, unsteady light across 60 faces, all oriented toward the center. None of them looked at her. She was peripheral, present, accounted for. She opened her mouth and began. The sound she made at first was wrong, tentative, a beat behind, her voice not finding the frequency of the section around her. She was listening to herself too much, monitoring her own output the way she monitored footage through a viewfinder, always one remove away from the thing itself. She was a professional observer. This was what professional observation felt like from the inside. Like standing behind glass, watching yourself participate. She stopped trying to assess it. She let the chanting around her enter through her ears and tried to produce something close to it without the intermediary step of understanding. Her voice found a middle register and held there. The section to her left picked up a counter rhythm, and she felt it in her chest before she heard it with enough precision to follow. She followed anyway, imprecisely, inadequately, and kept going. Somewhere in the second 15 minutes, she stopped noticing the discomfort. It did not feel transcendent. It did not feel like a breakthrough or a surrender, or any of the words that films used for moments like this. It felt like the specific experience of doing something poorly but committedly. Like being a beginner at something that mattered. Like being wrong in a way that was still better than not trying. Her voice was one voice among 60, and it was the least certain one, and it was there. She did not look at the dancer. She did not look at the colonnade. When the chanting descended back through its layers at the end, she followed it down. The last voice, not hers, stopped, and the courtyard went quiet. Clara sat in the quiet with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the stone in front of her. She did not look for the figure, not because she was afraid of what she might find, but because the looking was the problem, had always been the problem. And she understood that now in the specific way that you understand things you have learned with your body rather than your mind. After a long moment, she became aware that the men around her were rising, dispersing, the ring dissolving into the ordinary movement of people after a shared effort. She stood. Ida Bagusuta appeared beside her. He said nothing. He simply looked at her with the same expression he had worn at the gate when she first arrived, assessing, patient, arriving at a conclusion. He gave the smallest nod. Then he walked away. Amsterdam in November had the particular grayness of a city that had stopped apologizing for its weather. Clara landed on a Tuesday and took the train from Schiphol and sat watching the flat landscape go past. The water, the low sky, the sharp lines of everything. After 2 weeks of Bali's softness and heat, she had her camera bag on the seat beside her and her hard drives in her backpack and approximately 40 hours of footage from the trip, minus one night's recording that she had watched 3 times too many in a rented villa and would spend the next 4 months deciding what to do with. She did not watch any of it on the train. The edit took 3 months. She worked in her studio on the Kaisersgracht, a narrow room with north-facing windows and a desk that had been worn smooth by 15 years of the same work. She had edited documentaries about fishing communities and pharmaceutical trials, and a woman who spent 30 years translating medieval Flemish poetry. She was methodical and honest, and she had a reputation, modest but solid, for making films that did not simplify the things they examined. This film was the hardest she had cut. Not because the footage was difficult. It was extraordinary, some of the best she had made. The problem was the frame she kept returning to, the one with the figure in the colonnade. She had not deleted it. She had not been able to delete it, partly for the obvious practical reason that you did not delete original footage, but also for a less practical reason. She kept deferring, examining. She examined it finally on a Friday in February, sitting alone in the studio. with a cup of tea gone cold at her elbow and the frame paused on the screen. The figure was still there, still, still facing the lens. She sat with it for a long time. Then she moved it to a separate folder, labeled it with the date and the location and no other description, and closed the folder. She did not put it in the film. She spent 2 days writing the opening statement instead. It was short, 3 sentences, white text on black, before the first image. This film was made during 2 attendances at a Kecak ritual outside Ubud, Bali. The first attendance was made as an observer. The second attendance changed the filmmaker's relationship to the material. Her editor read it and asked if she wanted to explain further. "No," Clara said. "It raises questions you don't answer." "I know." He looked at her for a moment, then went back to the cut. The film screened at a documentary festival in Thessaloniki in April and won the jury's special mention. A small prize, a glass object she put on the windowsill of the studio, where it caught the flat northern light at certain hours and threw a pale shape across the desk. It went online in June. She sent Wayan a link with a short message, thanking him for his patience with her questions and his honesty about the things she had not known to ask. His reply came 4 days later. A single line. "You understood." She read it twice. Then she saved it in the folder with the figure. She was offered a commission the following autumn, a streaming platform, a series on ritual and ceremony across Southeast Asia, significant budget, full creative control. She sat with the offer for 3 weeks, which was longer than she usually sat with anything. She turned it down. She could not find a clean way to explain it that did not sound like something that had happened to her, had made her afraid, which was not quite accurate. The more precise version was this. She was no longer sure she could approach a ritual as a stranger, and the stranger's position, outside, watching, holding the frame, was the only position from which the work she made could be honest. She had been registered. That was the word Ida Bagus Sutta had used. She had been registered by something that now knew the shape of her attention, and walking into a ceremony with a camera and presenting herself as a neutral observer felt, after Ubud, like a claim she could no longer make in good faith. She took a commission instead, about a woman who repaired pipe organs. It was quiet and specific, and took her to 6 countries over a year. She loved it. The folder with the figure stayed on her hard drive, backed up in 3 places, never opened and never deleted. It sat there, the way certain experiences sit in a person, not haunting, not heavy, simply present, a record of a threshold she had crossed and returned from, changed in the specific way that honest encounters with things larger than yourself tend to change you. Not worse, not better, just different, in ways that took years to understand, and that she suspected she was still slowly in the process of understanding. If this story stayed with you, I think it was meant to. New stories from across Asia, every week, right here. I'm Haunted East. Subscribe if you want to keep listening.